Boy, Machen Cyber Warrior. He decided to really step in
live. We're live. It's for real.
And this time, we really mean it.
We haven't had a problem like this in a long time, but there you go. We'll make it work. But I know he's got friends that want to view with us. I'll play some music until he comes back in.
Everybody's gonna pray on the very last day when they hear that bell ring the world away. Everybody's gonna pray to the heavens on the judgment day. Now you can sing about your great King David. You can preach about the wisdom of...
All right, Aldo, you're there?
Yes, sir.
We'll just pick it right back up, and we've already got our intro. We did record that, and that's all good. So here we are, not with as many viewers as we would have had before, but we've overcome our technical difficulties. So Pastor Aldo Leon, we met for the first time at the GRN conference. We've got a mutual friend that you may or may not want to mention, and you are a PCA pastor in the Miami area.
Yes, sir. Is our mutual friend who I could mention, Mr. Dominic?
Oh yeah, Dominic Aquila, who's one of his first pastorates was in the Miami area, right?
Yeah. I would like to say he's an OG from Metro Dade area in the PCA for sure. He's been around this area for a long time, so.
Yeah, of course he lives north of you now, but I'm sure he's been a help and an inspiration to you. So, tell me about your early life, where you're from, what your family connections are, and then how you became a Christian.
Yeah, well, South Florida is like my I would say like my roots. So I'm a second generation Cuban, born and raised. Born in New Orleans, but raised in the Miami-Dade, South Florida area till I was 16. My mom, I wasn't raised in a Christian home by any means. My mom decided to relocate me to the Metro DC area to kind of give me a new start because I was extremely problematic as a kid, and depravity doesn't cease to function when you go to a new area. So in DC, it continued, and but by God's grace, when I was in my mid-20s, about 25 years old, the Lord called me by His grace, strangely through Buddhism. I got into boxing because I wanted to hurt people really well, and I started reading Zen Buddhist books about using your body and mastering it, and one of those books told me to read the Bible, and so I picked up a KJV Bible and I read it and I got converted, and I started attending actually Joshua Harris's previous pastorate, Sovereign Grace Church. That's where I got baptized, and it's kind of like a very cliff notes.
What city was that?
This is DC area, so like
okay.
Yeah, Maryland's on one side of the line, Virginia on the other. So I was right underneath DC.
So you were a real new Calvinist.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I was Calvinist by experience before I was conceptually. I remember people coming up to me and asking about my decision to receive Christ, and I remember telling them I didn't receive Christ. He forced me to believe in Him because there's no logical reason to explain that I would choose him, other than he superimposed his will on me and brought me to do it. And so like Calvinism, at least generic or broad Calvinism, was easy for me to embrace because it was just something that my experience just taught me that. So
Yeah, I've heard other people with that testimony that people came up to them and said, you're a Calvinist, and they said, well, what's that?
yeah,
So that was sort of your experience.
yeah.
So how long ago was this when you were in DC?
So it's like 25 when I got converted. So I'm a few months away from 40. So we're talking about like about 15 years ago. And around that time, started like getting heavily involved in my church, and my pastor expressed the the thought that I should potentially pursue seminary to like think about ministry in the future. So I started looking around for seminary opportunities, and I saw John MacArthur on the internet, and I heard him speaking with a level of conviction and clarity that wasn't around me, even in my local church context. And I said, if I'm going to go somewhere to be educated to preach, I think I should probably go where that guy's institution is. So I went across the country to LA, and I was in LA for almost 4 years, just getting pastoral experience and training in ministry. I am trained by a dispensational seminary. Now, I am obviously a stepchild that would probably not be owned by them, but that's where I went to learn theology and the scriptures and get prepared for ministry. And then eventually I came back down to Miami. And between going to LA to get prepared and start in vocational ministry there and coming to Miami, I became a Presbyterian very interestingly. So,
But you did minister as a Baptist pastor for a while.
yeah. My first call was in a Filipino church as a Baptist. I was an associate pastor of Hispanics in a Filipino church, and then I was a church planner in Miami with the SBC. So yeah, the Baptist world was where I got my foot wet in vocational ministry.
So how did you? When did you know that you had to become a Presbyterian?
You know what's funny is um, my pastoral experience regularly brought me to encounter things um, that demanded for me to make the switch, and so I was constantly looking for a consistent, coherent Christocentricity that I just didn't have in my tradition. So it was, I guess, in the place that I was, um, consistent Christ-centeredness would get lost when it came to ecclesiology. It would kind of fall off the cliff when it came to eschatology and sacraments. So I was like, I need a Christ-centeredness that is consistent and coherent, and I'm not finding it where I'm at. I
So,
also
so what
go ahead.
was there that if it wasn't Christocentric, what was it?
Well, you would find yourself, for example, like ecclesiology in the world that I was in seemed to be more reflective of America and its polity, and its like policies, and less from the scriptures. And so all of a sudden, when we're thinking through like ecclesiology and what the church is and what the church does and structure, it just seemed to reflect more of American ideals than of scripture. Um,
So it was cultural, but also congregational, so ostensibly democratic.
yeah. When it came to the sacraments, um, so like the scriptures speak about like God, glorifying Himself through a one-way covenant of grace. and it emphasizes his promises. But it seemed like the sacraments were more about the recipients. And so it just seemed like we're in a lot of places where I was trying to flush out like this big redemptive God-centeredness. There was just something in a particular area where it just didn't make sense to me. Whether it was even just the liberty of conscience, even piety, and just what does it mean to be pious, and what does it look like? It just didn't make sense. It seemed like there was just like a lack of coherence that I just couldn't make sense of until I made the switch. Also, like the first book I preached through as a church planter in Miami was Galatians, and Galatians just obliterated the discontinuity that I seem to have been committed to. Galatians 3, 4, basically we're all a part of like this big, grand covenantal structure. We are children of Sarah. And so I just kept finding places where just even like just preaching to the scriptures didn't make sense where I was. I also was looking for like a clarity. So I was not just SBC, I was also in Acts 29. And
Acts 29.
Yeah, so I was a SBC Acts 29 church planner. And something also that I struggled with that led me into the PCA was that there was a broadness, there was an ecumenical broadness that was too broad, I felt, to actually function with the clarity and precision that was necessary to plant churches and equip elders and whatnot. And so I felt like what it came down to is every local church is its own confession. Every local church is it's kind of like a held captive to like a personality or person. So like when I saw like congregational life on the ground, it just seemed like there was a broadness that I was not comfortable with. There was a elevation of persons and personalities, which was just I think very just inconsistent. And so I just eventually found myself needing to be a Presbyterian to be a healthy church planter, because what I was trying to on the ground be, it just wouldn't work with the in the place that I was in.
So I think you're right on with the critique of Acts 29. It's very much, I mean, because from being in it, a lot of those statements of faith or confessions of those churches, even the good ones, are probably written by the guy who started the church. A friend of mine was coming out of one and was sort of like in a conflict with his pastor because he had gone to seminary and had been introduced to all these Presbyterian and Reformed guys, and the critique was, you went off to seminary, you've learned all these guys. We don't need to go ahead and like rewrite our church just because of like something you heard when you were young. And like in my head, I wrote your church's statement of faith, and he planted it when he was younger. Like, so he very much did exactly what he's telling you not to do. And I always get the feeling, and I've shout out to the Restless guys because they've had me thinking about this stuff quite a bit from the Restless pod. But there sort of is like a feeder system in which Acts 29, and I'm not saying this is everywhere because I have friends who are still pastors there who I believe are very good Baptist pastors. They believe what they believe, and I have no doubt in their sincerity or genuine faith in Christ. But there very much is there is a way in which it's sort of a feeder system to a larger sort of circuit within that realm. Is this guy did well at this church, and so sort of slowly gets elevated up into a point where now you're at a conference level. Yep.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I really struggle with too is that when I came in, this is just my perspective. I'm not you know, acting like I have some kind of like, super objective like summary of everything. But when I came into Acts 29, and the SBC Acts 29 like vibe, gospel centrality and gospel application was the emphasis. It was the but what I noticed over time, it was, well, that was just simply what the most powerful people were about at the time. And so at that moment, it seemed very conducive to me because I was always craving a gospel centeredness that I eventually would eventually lead me into like the confessional covenantal world, particularly with the Westminster West guys. That was the gateway for me to go there. But the second those powerful figures have a new emphasis, which you see now is the emphasis is the socialized ecclesiology and missiology. Well, now guess what? All of the organization now is sucked into that, and so it was like basically like the personality and the persons really kind of like set the trajectory for everyone, and that's one thing that I find unique about our polity is, at least when it's supposed to function as it is a grassroots, on the ground, local church officer run trajectory and tone setter, as opposed to other polities. It just seems like whatever the most powerful figures are, ergo's like the tone of the movement.
So you're talking about the zeitgeist too. I mean,
Yeah.
the wokeism wasn't a thing when you started with Acts 29, but
No, it
I
wasn't.
think I hear you saying that's a good bit of their thing now.
Yeah. When I remember the big thing was gospel application, gospel centrality. Like, one of the I think he's not now in Soma, but that guy Vanderbilt, gospel fluency. So like that was a language you constantly heard, is applying the gospel and whatnot. And now it's moved into the incarnational, being the gospel, and not applying redemption, but being redeemers or co-redeemers with the language, and
You mean you're not redeeming Miami or just south of Miami where you are? You're not.
no sir, no sir.
So we'll talk more about this. We'll talk
Yeah,
more about this later. But in the we kind of recycled I think about a 24-minute summary of PCA General Assembly that you did, and toward the end of it, I was hearing some very strong spirituality of the church vibes from you, and
yeah,
that's sort of what you're referring to now. So we will revisit that for sure.
yeah,
One of the things you're talking about with the problems you had with Acts 29 eventually was sort of everybody makes it up as they go along to some degree, and also a sort of hyper contextualization. And some people want to make it up, and some pastors want to be the man and do everything the way they want to do it. But I gather you wanted some standards and order and backstops.
yeah. Absolutely. I found myself needing a tangible connectional um, structure that would protect me from myself and my church from me. That in the new Calvinist Baptistic culture, just it wasn't provided. And so, what I noticed about coming into the connectional universe, so to speak, was that there is a real tangible necessity to be accountable to those outside of your local church, and vice versa. And so it was like representation with accountability. And so I needed that as a young pastor, particularly like in a place like Miami, where we're very much we're not just on the bottom of the map, but there is a cultural and social and spiritual isolation from the rest of America, evangelical America. You notice something like the conferences don't go down here; they stop at Orlando. So like the level of isolation here.
They
Um,
can't hire the security, Aldo. You know.
Well, no, but he's right though. Like I heard a discussion just about the regions of America. Like Miami is the southernmost of the United States, but it's not the South. Like
yeah.
it's something altogether separate.
Yes.
Like the South basically ends just north of Orlando, and
Yep.
everything south of that is something else.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. Accountability in a tangible connectivity to me is important, and I think that's one of the things. Most of our people now, when I moved out of the SBC into the PCA, now they all understand it. But if there was one thing that they noticed immediately that they appreciated was, oh, okay, so it's beyond Aldo, and there's now a level of otherness that is in play when it comes to like our local church, and there is an accountability that is tangible, not just um, you know, abstract and just somewhat like stated. We're all one in Christ, but it's tangible. So the yeah.
So, did you bring a congregation or part of a congregation in with you? How did that work?
Yeah. So I am one of the few people who did first the insane thing of planting a church from scratch in Miami, um, which there has to be some screws missing to do that here. And then after a year and a half in, my conscience became comprehensively Presbyterian, and I brought my church out of the SBC into the PCA under Pinelands Presbyterian, um, as the overseeing church. And man, I'll tell you what, um, I if there was one thing that solidified the fact that I was a Presbyterian was the level of um, shame and guilt and resistance that happened when I did. I was I might as well have. You would think I embraced like Catholicism or oneness Pentecostalism or something
Or,
with the
or
way.
Mormonism?
Yeah. There, I'm not trying to like go all over the place, but there is in Miami, which is a 2/3 Hispanic world. In some sense, we're supposed to be Baptists or Pentecostals. That's what that we can be. You can be a Baptist, you can be a Pentecostal, but for you to,
If not Roman Catholic.
yeah, there's that. The it's interesting. Like Roman Catholicism now exists in Pentecostalism in Miami. Roman Catholicism is somewhat of like a moot point, but it's almost like revived itself in Pentecostalism, and so for me, a Latino to join a Presbyterian denomination, it's like the worst thing you could do. It's betraying your people, your spirituality, and so I lost all of our funding. And imagine like when you're a church planner, you don't have money to lose. 70% of your income comes from outside. I lost most of my money. I lost a third of our membership, and for like a year and a half, I was like, I guess my decision to become Presbyterian was the death blow to the church plant. But by God's grace, we persevered through it, and the church that was our overseeing session lost their pastor, and they um, approached, well, a conversation ensued about like their pastorate. They called me as their pastor, and I took my 60 or so folks into Pinelands Presbyterian, which was an established church of about 60 years in Miami. That's where Harry Reeder pastored about 25 years ago. So the church plant.
Wow. That
Yeah.
there's a data point.
Yeah. So I ended up going into the PCA almost nuclear bombing my church, surviving through it, and then getting absorbed into an existing church, which I am the pastor of now.
So, are
So,
you the senior pastor there at Pinelands, or just one of the pastors?
I am the senior and solo pastor at
Okay.
Pinelands. Yeah, yeah.
So, are you? Would you still like to have two churches out of that, or I mean, is Pinelands the perfect thing for what you were trying to do, or do you still need other churches kind of to reach the people that you wanted to reach?
You know what? Like, I would say yes to both of those. I do think that the merger, in some sense, Pinelands and so I was the church is Reconcile that I was a part of. Reconcile was mostly second generation Hispanics that were 20 to 40, that were unchurched. Pinelands was mostly 50 to 80 Anglo, with a one third black islander population. So what happened when we merged was literally like we just became a reflection of Miami
Right.
together, and so it is exactly, I think, where I need to be. I think it's very good, but I do think that we need a lot more churches in Miami to be established for sure. But
Well, you know, if Harry Reeder ever retires at Briarwood, you should call him as your associate or assistant pastor. That would be
let
good, wouldn't it?
me tell you something. If Harry Reeder is in the same church that I'm in, I'm listening to him Sunday to Sunday, and he's the OG that I gotta be under. I don't know, man. Like he
I don't
just
know. I thought that was a pretty good idea that I had there. Well, yeah,
yeah,
it's
man.
interesting. You said that all of a sudden, with your group coming in, you had a group that truly reflected Dade County there.
Yeah, yeah.
My wife grew up about 10 miles from where you are,
Oh,
and
really? Where at?
it was in Kendall.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah, and I forget the name of her high school. There are two of them, but she said it was one third white, one third black, and one third Latino.
yeah.
And so that's a true mix of the area. And to this day, her dad is in assisted living about 2 miles from your church.
Oh, wow.
So she could never figure out what church to attend when she's visiting in Miami. But guess where we'll go next time we're there.
Oh, that would be awesome.
Yeah, we'll be with you. So,
Give me a heads up, man.
all right. Well, tell us about your church. I mean, it looks like you have fairly contemporary worship, but tell us about your liturgy, or what you'd like to do, where you see it going.
Yeah. Well, I would say that let me be honest. When I came to Pinelands, it felt a lot more Baptistic than Presbyterian. Now, in South Florida, you will find that more often than not. Look, when I hear about other presbyteries in other places, I'm like, that sounds very different. So it's interesting how when I got there, I was the 2 year newly Presbyterian, and my view of polity, my view of liturgy, my view of the offices, my view of theology really stood out right away. And so in the last 8 months, there has been a revival and restoration of Presbyterianism there that I think was lacking a little bit in some ways. And so if I were to summarize where we're at now, it's that we are unapologetically confessional and covenantal And yet the sense, the contextual sense of being in Miami is not lost. So we're reading creeds and confessions. We're having prayers where we confess sins. We're administering the sacraments, twice a month, and we are, walking through, the redemptive narrative on a Sunday. But it has a, I guess you'd say it has an updated, like kind of like vibe to it that may be a bit different other places. So I guess that's what I would describe it as. Is we are unapologetically confessional. Liturgy is real for us, and yet it is. It has a vibe that can on the surface seem somewhat less formal. If that makes sense.
Well, I've often thought that it's probably really difficult to be a stodgy, old school Presbyterian in Southern California or South Florida. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a different world. It really is.
Well,
I mean, first time I visited down there, I thought I'm in another country.
Yeah. Well, what's funny? It's funny is so like with the people and with my peers, like I'm the TR guy. You know what that means. The totally reformed or totally repulsive guy. And it,
I haven't heard the second one, but
yeah,
I get it.
We're well aware with the sentiment of the latter.
yeah. And they're like, you like preach like on pedo baptism and like, I don't know, like basically like you actually like take seriously like the things that are in our confession and you preach them and you enforce them. And but with the people in our church that are coming in, they they don't they don't get that sense where like, wow, this is like a church where like people are just like staunchly, aggressively, or just inappropriately reformed. They're like, this is just a regular church, So it's, I guys, I really struggle with guys under 40 that are reformed often, because there's this vibe where it's really cool to be Presbyterian and just throw shade on our tradition. And I don't know, I'm just not with that. Like when I came into here, it was very costly to me. It was very difficult, and I came here by conviction, not by some kind of like pragmatic benefit. And so for it to be something that is, I don't know, just kind of like held in a very loose or soft or casual way by a lot of my peers, it frustrates me a lot, to be honest.
Well,
Yeah.
I think you're wise enough to take it slow and not to make unnecessary enemies. But I do like the inappropriately reformed phrase, and we may rename our podcast "Inappropriately Reformed."
Yeah.
I think we almost have to now. So
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Inappropriate, but not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I think we could be very much know who we are and strong about who we are, but and yet be open-handed and gracious at the same time, But I guess the thing that frustrates me is like it's almost cool to it's almost cool and trendy and appropriate to be dismissive of the things that make up our standards, and so that's just kind of like, I don't know, like, man, like there's plenty of places where you can go in evangelicalism where that is appropriate. I just don't think it's the PCA. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Maybe I have like I'm more hopeful about us.
Well, let me tell you a secret. There are plenty of young TR confessional committed to the RPW young men who take a very state-looking, old small town or maybe larger town tall steeple PCA churches, and they have as much trouble trying to make them Presbyterian
Yeah.
as you might.
Yeah.
So the PCA has always been a mixed multitude, and you probably know from the beginning, there were evangelicals and basically Southern Baptists who usually sprinkled their children, and mere cultural conservatives and people that didn't know why they were there in
Yeah.
some cases, and maybe a few that were there for bad reasons, which might have had a racial element. And then there were some really committed Presbyterians.
Yeah.
So we've always been mixed, and that's okay. We were told in the Bible that we would be a mixed lot.
Yeah.
I used to work for this guy, and he would go out west and fish, and he said, this flock of anywhere from 1,000 to 10,000 sheep would go down the road. And he said at the end of the flock there would be the three-legged sheep and the sheep with one eye and the ones that could barely walk. And that's a good picture of the church. There's plenty of damaged goods and sheep that aren't there yet, that have not been restored. So
Yeah.
it's good to remember.
Yeah. I like how the confession says, visible and less visible. And the idea is that it is a legitimately real church, even though it can oftentimes lack a vibrant visibility. You know.
Yeah, yeah. So tell me, we like to say that Presbyterian church government and Presbyterian worship are portable and they work anywhere. They're not culture bound. Do you believe that's really true? I mean, you're convictionally a Presbyterian. You're a Presbyterian for all the right reasons, but can it work in Miami or Sierra Leone or in Japan? Can it work anywhere?
Yeah. I mean, I I am I'm probably like one of um one of the people that I would say not just by conception, and just mere uh, abstract thought, but by experience, that I really believe that, and just speaking for me, like the urban minority metro Dade context, um, is our polity, our connectional, confessional, covenantal tradition. It works here. I see it work all the time. Um, because, well, first of all, obviously, like not just to say like obviously God's sovereign, and God, He asks the church as He so wishes. Um, but from like from a humanistic level, what I've noticed is that the gospel centrality that is offered in our tradition, it really is things that, like a place like Miami that is paralyzed by legalism, its Catholic roots, its Pentecostal shadow. I think when we come into this city, and we preach a God who covenants with us by grace on all the scriptures, like I really believe it's something that is received when all of a sudden a church is governed by a plurality of many men who confess as one. Not one pope confesses over the many. The people in this city have seen popery. Maybe not the actual pope, but they've seen all of the religious popery, where one confesses over the many. And so when people see a church governed the way we are, it is refreshing. I think the fact that so many people have been just abused spiritually by men kind of creating a standard that is very subject to them. When I've seen people come into our church and say, listen, we are governed by history. We're governed by scripture and history and the many generations of the church. I've seen it received very well. When Miami is very much, it is many things, but one thing it is a place for families, and family is huge here. And matter of fact, I think if there's one of the challenges I have is to pastor people into the supremacy of God and a lot of the supremacy of families. Um, and so when I begin to say that God is a multi-generational God, who covenants with you and those beyond you and attached to you, I don't know. I really think that in the small sphere that I'm in, and obviously like our church is like, a couple hundred, 200 people. I really believe that done well, in a healthy church, that a urban context like ours is ready for our polity, our theology to be encountered. But the thing is, I mean, again, I don't want to like go all over the place, but Miami has changed so radically. 30 years ago, we were the biblical South. And now like we're like we were I think we were one of the largest presbyteries in the entire US. We had, Steve Brown and Kennedy and these we were the largest presbytery. And now in Miami there's 10 PCA churches in Miami, with the largest one is 600. Most of them are like under, 400 to 400, 100 in a city of 3.5 million people. So things have changed a lot. And I think, but all that said, I do believe that, like this, this tradition that we're a part of, it is not, some kind of like, insignificant, outdated museum, spirituality that it just doesn't function in this context. It really does. I mean, Brad, I have guys literally moving here, to Miami from other places because they want to learn Reformed theology in a Presbyterian church in Miami. So yeah, that's my long spiel of it. I think it works.
Yeah, well, you've got a tremendous opportunity there. Now, I think when I met you in Birmingham, you had Jonathan was with you,
Yeah.
and he's quite a young guy. And there was another guy with you that wasn't so young, but they're guys in your church or who want to be involved or something, I guess.
Yeah. Jonathan actually, he told me today. He lives in Reno, Nevada. And he's like, "Hey, I'm moving there next summer. I want to help you. Build, uh, Presbyterian church in your context in Miami. I want to help you plant churches in Miami." And I don't know, man. There's something, obviously, like, I think there's something. This is maybe this is just me being biased, because it's my world. But I think there's something happening, in second generation Hispanics, that is a bit different, than other spectrums, other demographics. I feel like, all the stuff, like a lot of what I noticed with in the Reform conversation, um, with the white community and the black community, um, a lot of what they are dealing with is the frustration with Reformed theology, and the narratives that have preceded it and whatnot, and a lot of people are. But what I've noticed with like Latinos is we're discovering Reformed theology and we're enjoying it, and we don't. A lot of us don't understand, the other groups of people that are just really, disgusted with Reformed theology. So there's just something different that I've noticed, in our spectrum, and maybe there's probably like a lot of reasons to that, but one reason maybe is that, a lot of Latinos, we're majority and indigenous all in one. So our roots are European, and yet they are also connected with African and indigenous, as well. And so, like I think we have an eclectic, an ethnic eclecticism, that I don't know, just we enter into like the I guess the racial conversations in the church a bit differently. And so I don't know. I see. I really see an opportunity with Reformed theology in the Latino context, particularly with the second generation that is sounds and looks very different than other spectrums of society. That's just from my angle, my vantage point.
What do you think are some of the pitfalls that might be waiting for that second generation? I mean, if they come into Reformed theology in Presbyterian churches, where do you think they could go wrong? I mean, what is it about the culture or their experience that might make them liable to this problem or that?
You mean like what would be the problem that they would encounter like from others, or that they would have in themselves?
Well, maybe in themselves. I mean, I'm just wondering. I mean, I guess I have ideas about my own group, but I just wonder what cultural forces might make it difficult for them.
Yeah. I think it would depend on the kind of Latino they are. That's another thing. Like Miami is primarily like South America and the Caribbean. You go to LA, you're dealing with Central American, and so there is a very different cultural dynamic there that would affect that. So let me just speak for like my setting. Like so, if Latinos are coming into like Reformed churches, which are many often like Anglo dominant in many places, and if they are from the Caribbean tradition, they may struggle with the social dynamic that exists. So Caribbean people are just always hanging out. So I remember one of the things that my wife struggled with when we went to LA and we were in churches in LA. She would talk about hanging out with somebody, and they'd be like, "Yeah, next month I'll put you in my calendar for like 1 hour, like on Wednesday," And she was like, so for people that are highly relational and socialized, they may misunderstand um, dynamics and cultures that are not as much so, and it may be misinterpreted. And so I think that that would be a challenge. I think a lot. I've actually heard about that a lot. It's like I went to like this church, and I was seeking a life on life relationship dynamic that was just very like open. And I'm not saying that like that. It's not that like that doesn't exist. I'm just saying it may just be less culturally like predominant in those settings. And so that might be one thing they would do. Another thing that they would do is that we oftentimes come into like the Reformed faith with a lot of charismatic baggage, and God spoke to me and I saw this. That's just what we know. And so I think um, if you walk into a setting where people are not going to be able to walk you through that patiently, but they're just going to like I guess just drop the cessationist hammer on your face, that would maybe a challenge. So like the charismatic a background that can be hanging on us for years can be difficult. I think the highly socialized um, culture that we're used to can be difficult. Um, yeah, things like that.
Yeah, that's
Something.
exactly what I was asking, and I'm sure that if you drop a 17th century Scottish worship service on them, they may not get that the first time either.
Yeah, yeah. You know what I noticed is that um, give if you give people enough time, The things that seem very strange to them are no longer strange, but a lot of times people don't give it time. So I remember like the first time I baptized a baby. I mean, it was just like just the eyes and the looks and everything, and now it's like it's just very normal. So I think one of the if you want to be radical in Miami, then yeah, then plan a confessional church, and govern it as such. But eventually, what you notice is that once people give themselves time, it becomes very normal. But at first, it could be very jarring and a bit strange.
It's
Yeah, and
Scott Clark who wrote an article that a lot of times, like for a first time visitor to a Reformed church, it can be like stepping into another time period.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah, I think one of the ways you could encourage your people is you could tell them, and you probably have, how many Presbyterians there are in Mexico, how many there are in Brazil, a huge number.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
There's a wonderful Presbyterian organization in Peru, and my church is supporting a planter who's really trying to plant not just a church but a denomination in Honduras.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
that it's not foreign at all.
No,
So yeah, that's
no, no. Yeah, definitely like when you think about the broader globalized church, it's just in Miami. We have yet to become a Mexico. Let's put it this way. We have yet to become Presbyterian church planning and predominance has yet to have its day in Miami, but I'm very optimistic about it. You know,
all right. So well, were you at General Assembly? I'm sorry, I don't remember if we talked at General Assembly this year,
no, I didn't connect with you there.
but it was at GRN. So GRN's about as and Briarwood in Birmingham. That's about as different culturally as you're likely to ever encounter.
Yeah.
But what kind of reception did you get there?
Um, you know what? Like, I was treated about as kind and as hospitable as somebody who could be treated who came to some place um, that you didn't know. However, I just have to say that Briarwood is a little partial to Pinelands.
I guess so. Yeah.
Because the Harry Reid. But you bring up Brad, you bring up something I think key for me. So when I was in the SBC in X29, I was around a lot of people that um, were more demographically like me, um, you know. But I never felt like I was in the right place. And the first time I went to GA in 2018 or 19, um, almost almost everybody there um, looked very different, dressed very different, and I never had felt more included um, than I had in the past in other evangelical settings. Which is why, like, one of the things I was listening to, and I'm not trying to get controversial, but I was listening to the Asian, a lot of our Asian brothers get up in the assembly and state that they wanted to feel included um, in our denomination, um, based upon some other things taking place and being stated. And I was like, I've been in so many settings where everyone was Latino and everyone was black, and I genuinely like have felt an inclusion, a camaraderie, an identity that is very much robust that I've never felt in other places, and it's because I really believe that identity, when it is emphatically so in Christ, it creates a camaraderie amongst distinctions that is unique. And because our entire tradition is revolving around like this federal headship covenant narrative that kind of just sucks everything into it. I don't know. I feel at home. Like honestly, like I listen to podcasts like yourself. I listen to Heidelcast. Why? Because I feel at home when Jesus is being the epicenter of the conversation. I don't feel at home when um, humanistic tribal narratives are the driving epicenter. And so, like, I don't know, like, when I'm in the PCA, like, I feel at home. Now, obviously, like with the progressive narrative, I feel uncomfortable, but I'm just talking about like with the healthiness. So, anyways, this is yeah. I
I
very
think I,
much go ahead.
I think you're saying we've got it pretty good, and maybe we don't know how good we've got it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I get everybody has their own narrative, and obviously, look, it's not that like you don't encounter things that frustrate you. Um, um, Given like the fact that you have like maybe like some ethical tensions and some ethical issues, but these are people issues. You know what I'm saying? Like I've been I've when I hear people describe the PCA as if there is some systemic thing unique to the PCA, these are things that I've encountered anywhere when wherever I'm at, like the things that people are frustrated about, you just encounter them with people. So I don't think it's uh, I think a lot of like the racial conversations are not necessarily like a PCA thing. They're just first Adam people things that you encounter anywhere you go. So like um, so yeah, at Briarwood in Birmingham, I definitely felt at home. I felt beloved and very comfortable. And let me put it this way. I know I have a lot of peers that are in platforms that are in other traditions and Latino and Black and whatever. They don't invite me to ever talk about anything. So I don't know. Again, like just even being on with you guys and talking here, it just continues to um, experientially like give credence to like I don't know. I think I feel very much at home. Um, in Briarwood and the PCA and GR and whatever. So yeah,
Well, we're all about refugees and outcasts and mutants and all that sort of thing. You know that.
yeah.
You've heard a show or two,
Of
so
course, yeah, I tell you what, it's hard sometimes because I mean it's like hour and a half, sometimes it's 2 hours, but I'm there, bro. Yeah, I'm there. I got
yes, it's hard. It's very hard.
I listen to the whole thing, even if it's 2 hours. I just gotta break it up over like 8 days.
You need to move further away from your place of work so you have a suitable commute.
Well,
Yes,
why
the
So you
don't
thing.
can
why don't
listen.
we start doing that? Why don't we just have the same guest for a half hour, like 4 different times a week? We would get so much more sleep.
Yeah, man. I mean, my people give me. I got a podcast. People give me a hard time because it's like 50 minutes, and I'm like, come on, bro. I mean, seriously, like, I, I guess I'm not as compelling as other people to go for 15 minutes. I don't know, man.
All right, so we sort of organically moved into the PCA, and you gave a report on the PCA, and it was pretty cogent, about 22 minutes. And Mel Duncan suggested on Twitter that he called it to our attention. So I'm happy to steal and recycle and borrow. I immediately contacted you and said, "Hey, can we use this audio?" Which we ripped from the video. But a lot of people said, and they'd already heard our summary and other people's summaries and their own pastors' summaries, and they thought that your summary was very good. Do you want to give us the 5 minute version of your 22 minute PCA General Assembly summary, which I gather you got from watching the live stream?
Yeah. Okay. And let me just give like a disclaimer. um, these are my impressions. I don't want to sound like I have some kind of I'm some kind of like a um, I'm some this is not the Aquila report kind of like commentary. Um, and so
Well, we're going to call you Bishop Aldo. You know, whatever you say.
yeah, yeah. Okay, so here's what I saw, and obviously, like I would say in seed form, I do think that I know there's other things that need to take place. I know that we go back to the presbyteries, and I know that the next few years um, will tell the story as to how significant this year was. But what I saw in this assembly was that the loud voices, whether it was individuals in particular churches, whether it was particular platforms and whatnot, that made the PCA seem like it was dogmatically moving into a contemporary, progressive, updated, culturally accommodating denomination. I didn't see that as the majority. I saw that. I saw that. I heard that. I mean, in some sense, I felt like I was being told that that's who we are. But when you saw the officers on the floor, the actual churchmen, when you saw them speak, and when you saw the tallies, and when you have the conversations on the side, I really saw that there is a true um, conservative confessional um, majority that exists there. I saw that local churches and local officers are the ones who seem to be still setting the tempo for our denomination. Um, you saw that when you notice how people talked to and reasoned about the the MTW, and they were thinking through the issue of like who oversees things on the mission field, and whether it be with this thing or the other thing. You saw that with the conversation about the Calvary Presbytery, and them telling one of their ministers that they can't teach contrary to the confession. What I saw is that local churchmen, particularly not just local churchmen, but ruling elders, seem to be um, uh, very much um, the majority of those are very much speaking for a confessionally robust PCA. And I saw that with the sexuality conversations. I saw that with how we process how the Calvary Presbytery and the confession. I saw that with the MTW, and I also saw that, and maybe this is me seeing too much, but when I saw like the white supremacy thing and the Asian a grievance thing and the other things, when I saw a lot of those the study committees come up and us dismiss them, what I noticed, what I felt was, guys, enough, enough with this cultural narratives, identity politics that seem to be absorbing the conversations and ministry of the church. Guys, let's not even deal with this. Let's not talk about this. Let's get back to administering the means of grace and doing a ministry. Now, I could totally like have misunderstood that, but again, like I saw what I saw was a good majority confession that we are very much not what people are saying about us. Now, again, time will tell what that really is about and where it goes. Um, but I don't know. I was encouraged about it. Obviously, you still have like a third of people in a lot of settings that were thinking differently. Um, one thing that I didn't see a lot of that I would have liked to have more clarity of was the social justice missiology. I didn't. Obviously, we didn't talk about that. That was not something that was like on the overture floor. But I do think that that's something that I would definitely like us to have a bit more um, language clarity, as we did with the sexuality, like with regard to the transformationalist takeover society, social justice, missiology that seems to just be also um, surrounding these conversations. So I was encouraged. I think we are a lot more like our our predecessors and confession than other people realize. Yes, there is discrepancies. Yes, there is a minority that feels different. Yes, maybe I'm being too enthusiastic, but I don't know. I'm gonna take it as a um, I'm gonna be hopeful until proven otherwise. I I think your take about it, and you were saying the necessity for things to go to the presbyteries and whatnot. I was like, I very much received that and understood that as well. So
Yeah, and I think there's some study committee fatigue.
yeah,
Also, because we had one active, and because they've gotten kind of expensive, the administrative committee actually asked that we don't not that we not crank up any more.
yeah,
I was thrilled by that. So there were reasons besides principle
yeah.
that we
I
that
agree.
we
Yeah.
didn't do it. But I do think it's a good thing because when we look at liberalize, and I'm not saying the PCA is a liberalizing church, but when you looked at the Southern Church in the 50s and 60s as they were clearly liberalizing, and the PCUSA and most mainline denominations to this day, they put out a position paper or a study every month. It seems like there's no issue that they don't feel obligated to speak to.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
things eternal, or maybe what we should be a
Yeah.
little more concerned with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And your experience in your community is that I think your people are not really interested in that from a church. Because when you did your GA summary, I heard
Yes.
let the church be the church, and and not try to do and fix everything.
Yep. 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 I think I'm constantly having this conversation, and the conversation is this: does the Jesus narrative drive all narratives, or does every lesser narrative drive his narrative? And what I've been able to experience in our church regularly is the demand and necessity for the Jesus narrative, the narrative above all narratives, to drive um, every human narrative. And I guess the thing that I'm noticing in the PCA, it's not the PCA. I'm sorry, in evangelicalism in America, is that every lesser narrative seems to be hijacking and driving gospel narratives, and it's almost like we're now listening to the gospel through the primacy of the various narratives, whatever it is. This week it's this one, next week is this one. It's interesting. I sometimes I get a little bit vocal on Facebook more than I should, um, and I think I need to listen to my wife more. You know,
Well, that's always good advice.
yeah, yeah. But but
Usually,
but I told one guy, I said, listen, man, like you sound like whatever CNN and mainstream media is talking about um, becomes the gasoline that drives your scriptural um, prophetic speaking before the church. And again, like I think when you look at the book of Acts, when you look at the epistles, when you look at it's interesting. I was talking to like a pastor in Cuba that we work with, um, and he said, you know what I'm doing in my country? I'm preaching the hope of the gospel, and I'm meeting needs. When I heard him say that, I'm like, yeah, that's what you see in the Bible and the scriptures and the New Testament narratives. You see the the ultimate narrative always being that which seems to be the preoccupation of the church. I'm going through the book of Revelation, and over again, the persecuted church under Caesar's oppression. Um, it just John keeps bringing us back to some kind of gospel narrative, emphatic crescendo, amen, over and over to the different camera angles that he does. And so, again, like maybe I read too much into that, but I felt like my takeaway from that conversation, guys, come on, man, let's get back to gospel preaching, okay?
Yeah, I used to use the hashtag a lot. Remember when Paul, and it's because remember when Paul said, "Well, you Corinthians have a great praise band," or remember when Paul said, the Ephesians need to penetrate the arts community,
Yeah,
or whatever. If I can't imagine Paul being for it and actually doing it, I've got a good reason to be skeptical about whether it has a place
yeah, yeah,
today.
yeah.
Today,
Yeah, I live and die by First Corinthians 2. I decided to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and Him crucified. I'm finding it intriguing how we are deciding to know many things amongst us except the cross. Like it's like our notoriety is for the wrong things. And it's not that like um, we don't address things, but again, we're always addressing things with the preeminence of the gospel narrative. The other day I was listening to a few PCA ministers um, talk about how Juneteenth is the gospel, um, and I'm okay. Let me get this straight, guys. We're PCA ministers. We have covenant theology, and we have all of this like Jesus is a point um, of the scriptures. Um, and you guys are sitting over here. I don't know for what reason. Maybe it's because I don't know. You're just trying to just look accommodating, or you're trying to like look like you like you care. You're attributing things to have a redemptive, eschatological significance that are temporal and just earthly. Now, I'm not saying that Juneteenth does not have a common grace, a beauty to it. I'm not saying that it's not something that we can enjoy, but there's no gospel. That's not gospel. Gospel is First Corinthians 15, and
well,
so
and if we could say, and I'm not making these things equivalent because they're not at all, but there's a sense in which if you can say that Juneteenth is the gospel, or July the 4th, 1776 is the gospel,
yeah,
you could also say that the Cuban Revolution was the gospel. I mean,
yeah, yeah,
and some of your Roman Catholic liberation theologians
yeah,
would have said
yeah,
that.
yeah. You know what's funny? Actually, in that same conversation, um, the minister said, "Well, uh, gospel liberty, true gospel liberty is both spiritual and political. If it's a whole gospel." And so I said, "Okay, okay. Let me just be really practical. My people, when I say my people, I mean Cuban people. They have had no political freedom for 60 years. Are you telling me that they don't know the freedom of the gospel? Are you telling me that they don't have every spiritual blessing in the heavenly places in Christ because they are not experiencing the whole gospel? I have a problem with you telling somebody that who is united to Christ, who has been indwelt by the Spirit of God and brought into union with Him, that they are not participating in the full comprehensive gospel. Like, I mean, yes, I mean that's why Paul says, "I am a prisoner of the Lord." So he saw his political situation in light of the primacy and preeminence of his spiritual identity, and so we cannot again like I'm not saying that we should not be interested in our political situations being free. I utterly, one of the things that frustrates about Cuba is this lack of political freedom. And but still, the freedom of the gospel and the hope of the gospel and the reality of the gospel is not something that is horizontally constrained at all. You know, there is a freedom in Christ that is just not necessarily contingent to what is going on socially or politically. And that's what it seems like. I mean, you're in the same world I'm in. It's like, well, the whole gospel is basically how many horizontal things can go in your favor, humanistically speaking, socially speaking, in order for the true gospel to be true. Well, I just don't see that as being something that is biblically tenable or even hopeful. Particularly, can you imagine like just telling my partners in Cuba, hey, all your people don't have the whole gospel, because if you really have the whole gospel, your people would not be politically oppressed. Just you can't go there anyway.
Yeah, so we should talk about Cuba a little bit. And I told my wife this morning, I said, I'm gonna ask him if Cuba opened up and there was a big change, would he be one of those people that, his church would minister down there? But you're already doing that, it sounds like. You've already got connections.
Yeah.
So that's wonderful to hear.
And we should take a second to recognize the first two rules of Presbycast.
That's where I was going.
The first one being no beer reviews, not now, not ever. And the second one is no communism, not now, not ever.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. I feel very comfortable with you guys. I don't even feel like I'm being recorded right now. I'm sorry if I'm too comfortable. But what's interesting, what I found very interesting was to listen to how people talked about Floridian Hispanics post-election. And one of the things that they said about Hispanics in Florida is that the reason why so many Hispanics in Florida vote conservative is because they're whitewashed. And again, this is related to Cuba. And so for me to hear that, it's like, no, the reason why we vote a certain way is because we come from Cuba and we know what it sounds like to speak a certain way politically. And so when certain things sound a certain way that are very resonating with where we come from, our backdrop leads us to be inclined to think differently about who we vote for when certain people are in front of us. Yeah, we are. Every Cuban is. Let's say many of us are very much anti-communist. We heard all the stuff about equity and opportunity for everybody with all of that stuff, and then it just didn't work out as such.
And it's interesting to see, of the Cuban Americans or Cubans who have immigrated over here, how they're painted by the media for standing up against the Cuban regime. Jorge Masvidal, the UFC fighter, went on a huge anti-communism tour with the former president's son. Pitbull famously did a video kind of this week, with language, unfortunately, that we can't pull it for this podcast, but no and it was I'm with you. I remember seeing the tweets after the election. I was like, how could all these areas vote this way? It's like, do
Yeah.
you like Cuba is closer to parts of Miami than other parts of the state
Yeah, yeah.
by a long shot.
Yeah.
You can take a boat to Cuba faster than you can drive to Tallahassee.
Yeah. I mean, like our relatives have experienced, death, imprisonment, abuse, all sorts of stuff, and so yeah, not to go on a rabbit hole, but I think one of the things you've noticed in the evangelical conversation is this kind of like dismissiveness of Marxism and this
Mm-hmm.
kind of like trivialization of it, and it's the boogeyman. Let me just speak for me personally. Marxism is very real for Cubans. It's not a boogeyman. It's not some kind of like, university conversation. It's not some debate on Facebook with, a bunch of like bored Christians. Like Marxism is our narrative. And we are one of those people that have experienced, Marxist ideology on the ground. And so when someone like myself speaks about that, it's coming from actual narratives and actual people who have been dealt that blow, and it's not just I think with the way it's often portrayed for other people. I don't know. Maybe it's different for other people, but for us, it's very real. It's not just some kind of like a academic debate, you know.
Yeah, well, we call them seminar socialists
Yeah,
sometimes, but there's some actual hardcore Marxists. There are always people in this country through the 40s, 50s, 60s that really did want to, they really were sympathetic to the Soviets and others,
yeah,
and
yeah.
yeah, so
Did you guys ever see that documentary Cuba and the Cameraman?
I don't think so.
Go ahead and watch it. It's really well done, really well shot. But at the end, like the Castro was the guy's hero, and so um, there is an abstract, very like ethereal. I think
Idealized.
yeah, that it's just when you're on the ground, like and you're there. I mean, I used to be before COVID. I was in Cuba like every year for like a week or two. I would live there basically with the people we work with, and so when you see on the ground, like like again, it just you engage and you see these conversations very differently. So
An interesting person for you to get to know would be PCA pastor and church planter Albert Kona. He's an Albanian, and he grew up under communism and was there when it fell. And he can tell you a lot about the societal stresses that come, and the charlatans who flood into a newly free country. The cults, the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses tend to get there before anyone else. But he told
Can we just go ahead and book them two on this show together and just let that be the introduction and just like we'll just walk away and they can just keep talking.
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. What's funny is I've noticed as many Eastern Europeans have they've made some interesting commentary on what they're hearing in our culture and our context now. And one of the things you keep saying is that hard totalitarianism always starts with soft totalitarianism. It doesn't start hard, and so yeah, we have a lot in common with Eastern European. I mean, I remember like when I was in LA, one of my jobs in ministry was with a nonprofit that allowed me to go to places like Belarus, And when I went to Belarus, and I was, um, the gulag is real there. Like, I mean, you're talking about like Russia's right over there. Um, there was a understanding and camaraderie, even though we are so very different and so geographically like far apart, because we've experienced a lot of the same political backdrop in our families. And so yeah, you'll notice something very interesting. You notice is when all the people down in Miami were waving the Cuban flag, you notice they were waving the American flag at the same time. And so there is an appreciation um, of this context that seems to be a bit unique when somebody comes out of like a Cuba, because we've experienced something very, very, very different, very, very opposite. There's
Do you think the protests that are going on now are for real, or do you think that's just that there won't be any near term change there?
so what I did, one of the first things I did was I set up a conference call with the pastor we work with, and I just listened to him talk, and I said, look, I want to hear you talk. I really I don't want to really take in the media conversations. And what let me just give you my take on what he told me without getting in a long conversation. My take on what he told me was what's going on in Cuba is not the 1960s and the civil rights movement, um, where you have organized people, you have ideologies and thoughts, and and conviction driving things. What's going on in Cuba is more like George Floyd riots in the summer, uh, during pandemic. It's just a bunch of tired people, exhausted, overwhelmed, just losing their minds and just going bonkers. And so that said, when I listen to people on the ground talk about what they see, um, it didn't sound like it was some optimistic movement that would turn into something. It just, honestly, in my opinion, things will probably be worse when the dust settles.
Right.
Um,
Well, I'm sure you're praying about that, and our listeners will want to pray for your efforts to continue to help the church down there.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I tell you what, man. Like the church. It's just one thing that communism did in Cuba was it gutted Catholicism, and it made this huge religious vacuum that evangelicalism stepped into. And yeah, the gospel definitely there, it's definitely robust there. And I go there, and like I always come back to America very encouraged with how people do so much with so little, um, and we oftentimes seem to do so little with so much. So Cuba is very good, from a local church sense, very well off. From a societal common grace sense, awful. You know, terrible.
Yep. Well, we got a late start with our technical difficulties, and we don't want to keep you all night. But anything you haven't said that you want to say? Um, any? Now, I think someone did say the name of your podcast is what is
Well,
I s-
I'm a bit of an overachiever. Um, so I'm a part of two podcasts. One is called Saints and Sinners, and that is a very deep theology uh, conversation with three other pastors, where we're just, we're going uh, we're going through like the Heidelberg Catechism, and we're unpacking like doctrine of God and stuff. That's one podcast I'm a part of. So one of the things that I did is that I realized that many people in my church were not listening to that podcast, and I'm a churchman, so to me to do something for a audience out there that is not benefiting like my actual context, it didn't make a lot of sense for me to do that. And so I created another podcast called Gospel on Tap. And Gospel on Tap is basically taking the cookies off the shelf and putting them a little lower. And it's, I guess it's kind, it's similar to you guys like you guys talk about like regular things like barbecue and you joke. So you go really deep and you go really light. You go really deep and you go really light and like you have like a lightness and a heaviness. And so Gospel on Tap is that it is seeking to go heavy and go light in a way that it's very much relatable to like Miami people. So yeah, those are my two podcasts. They're you know they're yeah, that's what I do. So
All right, wanted to make sure people could look. I'm sure they can find them on any podcast app,
yeah,
and we'll certainly have you on again. And we also hope to see you at General Assembly next year, and maybe our friend Albert Kona will be there because I don't know if we get you two together. I don't know that anything could stop you. I just
yeah,
don't.
yeah,
I don't know that he was ever a boxer, but he still looks like he could break most
Not
of
in
us.
the. I get the feeling he did some boxing, but not in the like official sanctioned sense.
who the other guy or me?
The Albanian. No, the Albanian.
Oh yeah.
We know you were the real thing.
No, I was I just sparred in a gym, but I never went like professional and nothing like that. Yeah. But no, I guess if one thing I did want to say, I just first of all, I really appreciate like the invite. Super humbled, super grateful. Honestly, like my I benefit a ton from you guys' conversations, and I really like. I don't know. I mean, a lot of much of my ministry is affected by podcasts like yourself that are just trying to, quote unquote, um, celebrate and portray and provide old school Christianity, old school Presbyterianism to a broad context. So I really appreciate what you guys do. I benefit from it, and I my one of the things that was really encouraging me is like one of my great passions is that people like myself in context like myself would be able to just participate in like this beautiful tradition that I think is just biblical and Christ centered, and so I want that deeply, and I also want people like yourself and others to just be aware of that as well. And so I was super encouraged just to like be on here. Like it's funny, like Jonathan, he was like, "We made it,"
That's Jonathan Gonzalez
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you
yeah,
mentioned.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He's like, "We made it," because we really like I guess we really want the Latino context um to make significant headway, like in confessional Presbyterianism. So, yeah, man.
Well, you're much more of an encouragement than you know, and our listeners love shows like this. We've had lots of. You're not an international Presby, but we've had lots of church planners and internationals. But again, Miami's just about another world, so we'll give you
Yeah,
credit for both. But
yeah, yeah.
yeah, we're we're getting a lot more out of you than you're getting out of us. But we'll meet you in person someday, and that'll be even better.
Sounds great.
So, yeah, well, thanks, and Resby will tell everyone good night, and we'll edit out some of that stuff at the beginning, and it'll sound like a real podcast.
Yeah, people will never notice. As we say, it'll buff out. So thanks, Aldo, for coming on. Thanks to everyone for watching, commenting, especially as we switched up the links. I neglected to mention before, so I'll get my last point in. It seems like a lot of the way the media tries to portray communism in a light, or the way people who've had direct experience with it, try to. It seems like it's falling on deaf ears to the current society. We've seen a lot of that from like the old CRC folks who came into the PCA and are talking about whatever theology or leftward leaning, and that how it seems like sometimes it falls on deaf ears, but it's real. We should listen to it, and hear that and take it because people lived it. So again, thank you guys to everybody for listening. Remember the 3 rules of Presbycast: no beer reviews, no communism, and don't be a nerdman.
If you are a Christian, yes, you sure will catch hell today. When you become a Christian, you are bound to change your ways. But all Satan expects for you, yes he does, to stay the same old way. But people who are non-Christians throw stumbling blocks in your way. And if you are a Christian, Lord, 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 you'll catch it each and every day.
Magic on the internet worldwide.